Scarlet and Black by Stendahl. The small town of Verrieres is one of the prettiest in the province of Franche-Comté. The town is sheltered on its northern side by a high mountain ridge, part of the Jura range. A mountain stream which comes tumbling down from the heights passes through Verrieres and supplies power to numerous sawmills. The wealth acquired by this little town does not, however, come from the sawmills. You have scarcely set foot in the town before you are deafened by the din from a noisy and fearful-looking machine, making thousands of nails every day. If the traveller asks who owns this fine nail factory, he will be told, that belongs to his worship the mayor. If the traveller stops in the main street of Verrieres, l'Avenue de la Fidélité, you can bet 100 to 1 he will see a tall man appearing on the scene with the look of someone going about important business. He has a high forehead and a Roman nose. People even think that it combines the dignity befitting a village mayor with that special charm which can still be found in someone rising 50. Such is the mayor of Verrieres, Monsieur de Rênal. He walks solemnly across the road and disappears from sight into the town hall. But if the traveller continues his stroll, he will notice, 100 yards or so further up, a rather fine-looking house, and through the iron gate next to it some very splendid gardens. The profits from his sizable nail factory have enabled the mayor of Verrieres to put up this fine dwelling. On a clear morning in autumn, Monsieur de Rênal was strolling along the l'Avenue de la Fidélité with his wife on his arm. "I'm determined to take on young Scarlet, the sawyer's son, as part of the household," said Monsieur de Rênal. "He can keep an eye on the children, who are becoming rather a handful for us. He's a young priest, or as good as, knows his Latin, and the children will learn a great deal from him. I did have some doubts about his morality, as he was the blue-eyed boy of that old surgeon who was a member of the Legion of Honour and came to board at the Sorels on the strength of being a cousin of theirs. He had taken part in all Buonaparte's campaigns in Italy, and this liberal taught young Scarlet Latin and left him his books. But Father Julian told me that young Scarlet has been studying theology with him for 3 years with the intention of going to the seminary, so he isn't a liberal, and he does know Latin. This arrangement works out in more ways than one," went on Monsieur de Rênal, glancing at his wife. "Valnor is as proud as anything, but he hasn't got a tutor for his children. He might well get in before us with this one." "So you approve of my plan?" said Monsieur de Rênal with a smile. "Right, that's settled then." "Heavens above, my dearest, you are quick to make up your mind." "That's because I'm a person of character. Let's make no bones about it. We are surrounded by liberals here. All the cloth merchants are envious of me. 2 or 3 of them are getting filthy rich. Well, I like the idea of their seeing Monsieur de Rênal's children going past on their walk in the charge of their tutor." Monsieur de Rênal smiled proprietorially at his wife. She was a tall, well-built woman who had been the local beauty. She had an artless look about her and a youthful way of walking. Her heart was quite untouched by coquetry or affectation. Monsieur Valnor, the wealthy master of the workhouse, was believed to have tried to win her favours, but with no success. This had cast a dazzling light on her virtue, since this Monsieur Valnor was one of those vulgar, brazen individuals who are called handsome fellows in the provinces. At 6 o'clock the following morning, Monsieur de Rênal called on old Sorel's mill. Old Sorel was most surprised and still more pleased at the unusual proposition which Monsieur de Rênal made to him in respect of his son, Julian. Sorel's reply at first consisted entirely of a lengthy recital of all the formulas of respect he knew by heart. While he was reeling off these empty words, the old peasant's fertile mind was trying to work out what could possibly induce such an important person to take his good-for-nothing son into his own household and offer him the undreamed-of wage of 300 francs a year. This demand which old Sorel had had the brilliant idea of putting forward out of the blue, had been accepted forthwith by Monsieur de Rênal. The mayor was struck by this request. Since Sorel isn't delighted and overcome by my proposition, it's clear that he's received offers from another quarter. And where can they come from, if not from Valno? Monsieur de Rênal tried in vain to get Sorel to make a deal on the spot, but the old peasant's scheming mind was dead against it. He wanted, so he said, to consult his son. Monsieur de Rênal departed in some consternation. Old Sorel called Julian 2 or 3 times to no avail. It was not so much the noise of the saw as his absorption in his book, which prevented the young man from hearing his father's thundering voice. A violent blow sent the book flying out of Julian's hands. A second blow was delivered just as violently across the top of his head.
"You lazy bones, you! Won't you ever stop reading your blasted books while you're on duty, eh?"
Julian was a small, frail-looking young man of 18, with irregular but delicate features and an aquiline nose. His large, dark eyes, in moments of calm, suggested a reflective streak and fiery temperament. He had a low forehead framed by dark chestnut hair, and when he was angry this gave him a fierce expression.
"Answer me without lying, you revolting bookworm. How do you know Madame de Rênal? When have you spoken to her?"
"I've never spoken to her," replied Julian. "I've only ever seen the lady at church."
"There's something going on here all the same," retorted the wily peasant, and he fell silent for a moment. "Go, pack your bundle, and I'll take you off to Monsieur de Rênal's, where you're going to be tutor to the children."
"What'll I get for it?"
"Your board and lodging, and 300 francs in wages."
"I don't want to be a servant."
"No one's talking about being a servant, you dolt. Would I want my son to be a servant?"
"But then, who am I going to have my meals with?" This question threw old Sorel. He lost his temper with Julian, swearing profusely at him and accusing him of being greedy, and went off to consult his other sons. This horror of eating with the servants was not natural to Julian. He would have done far more distasteful things as a means to fortune. He got this repugnance from Rousseau's Confessions, the one book his imagination drew on to help him picture the world. The collected bulletins of Napoleon's great army and the St. Helena Chronicle completed his Koran. Early next morning, Monsieur de Rênal summoned old Sorel, who kept him waiting well over an hour before he finally turned up. By dint of enumerating all kinds of objections, Sorel gathered that his son would eat with the master and mistress of the house, and on days when they had company, alone in a separate room with the children.
"Well, then," said Sorel in drawling tones, "there only remains one thing for us to agree on. The money you'll give him."
"What?" exclaimed Monsieur de Rênal indignantly. "We agreed that yesterday. I'm giving him 300 francs.
"That was your offer. I don't deny it," said old Sorel, speaking even more slowly. "But," he added, looking straight at Monsieur de Rênal, "we've had a better offer." A look of consternation came over the mayor, but he pulled himself together, and after a masterly dialogue lasting over 2 hours, the peasant's shrewdness got the better of the rich man's, the latter not having to rely on shrewdness for his livelihood. Once back at the sawmill, Sorel looked in vain for his son. Wary of what might happen, Julian had gone out in the middle of the night. He had carted everything off to the house of a friend of his, a young timber merchant called Fouquet. When he reappeared, his father greeted him with, "Get your rags together and be off with you to his worship's house." Julian was astonished not to be beaten, and left in haste. He walked quickly in the direction of Monsieur de Rênal's house, but as soon as he caught sight of it, he was seized with overwhelming shyness. Julian was not the only person to feel deep agitation at his arrival in the house. Madame de Rênal was coming out into the garden through the French window of the drawing-room when she noticed the figure of a young peasant standing by the front door. Julian was facing the door and did not see her coming. He started when a gentle voice said, right in his ear, "What have you come for, dear?" Julian turned round in a flash, and, astonished at her beauty, he forgot everything. "I've come to be tutor here, madame," he told her at last. Madame de Rênal was struck speechless. "Can it be, sir," she said to him at last, "that you know Latin?" "Yes, madame," he said shyly. Madame de Rênal was so happy she plucked up the courage to say to Julian, "You won't scold the poor children too much, will you?" "Me scold them?" said Julian in surprise. "Why should I?" To hear himself addressed as Sir by so well-dressed a lady was far beyond anything Julian had anticipated. "Shall we go in, sir?" As soon as she was inside the hall, she turned to face Julian. His look of astonishment at the sight of such a fine house was a further source of charm to Madame de Rênal. It was at that moment that Madame de Rênal was struck by how extremely good-looking Julian was. "How old are you, sir?" she asked. "Nearly 19. She took his wistful expression for shyness and tried to encourage him. "What's your name, sir?" she asked, with a delicacy of tone which thoroughly charmed Julian's feelings. "I'm called Julian Sorel, madame. I'm very nervous at coming into a strange household for the first time in my life. I shall need you to protect me and to forgive me a good many things in the early days. I never went to secondary school. I was too poor. I'll never scold your children, madame. I swear before God I won't." As he uttered these words, he plucked up the courage to take Madame de Rênal's hand and raise it to his lips. And so Julian entered the mayor's household, where his employer found him exemplary, where the children adored him, and where he might have read a feeling of special liking in Madame de Rênal's heart, if only he had wished to. For his part, Julian felt nothing but hatred and loathing towards the high society he had been admitted to. Elisa, Madame de Rênal's chambermaid, had also lost no time in falling in love with the young tutor. Soon after Julian's arrival, Elisa inherited some money, and went to confess to Father Chelan that she had it in mind to marry Julian. The priest was genuinely delighted at his friend's happiness, and he was greatly surprised when Julian announced to him in resolute tones that Mademoiselle Elisa's proposal was not acceptable to him. "Beware, dear boy, of what your heart is up to," said the priest with a frown. "I congratulate you on the strength of your vocation, if that's the only reason why you spurn a more than adequate fortune. I hope, however, that you don't have any illusions about what awaits you if you go into the priesthood. If you're thinking of courting men in high office, it's a sure road to eternal damnation. I dimly perceive in the depths of your character a smouldering ardour which doesn't signal the renunciation of worldly advantages that is essential to a priest. I predict great things of your intellect, but, if you'll allow me to say so," the kindly priest added with tears in his eyes, "I shall fear for your salvation if you go into the priesthood." Julian was ashamed of the emotion he felt. For the first time in his life he could see that someone cared for him,